Okay, so I'll just start off very briefly and leave up more place for the discussion. I think the same rules apply as with other questions of regulating the internet. I think the internet regulation shouldn't influence the data flow in terms of content or access to content that is being spread out the internet. I think we should limit the regulation or QoS to solely to function as a what's the word as a sustainability of the network. Everything else is everything that is being done over the top is not acceptable, because it's not connecting content industry and access industry into one bundle, or allowing that content is being regulated. I think that again works against everything that internet was built on. I think it works against everything internet was meant to be, and it's just plain wrong. Thank you.
Okay, well that was very, very brief. I don't know, are we not doing presentations? Is this on? Because then maybe I can use this instead of the handheld one.
You can use it. Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know me, I know that there are quite a few of you in the room who do know me, but for those who don't know you, my name is Kate Nyman. I work for Cisco Systems in our Brussels EU Government Affairs Office. For those who don't know Cisco, Cisco is a networking technology company. And we've sort of been actually part of designing and building the internet since its very inception. So, one of the things that we do is something called Cisco's Visual Networking Index, where we look at traffic and what's happening in the internet, what's happening in IP networks, and what are the sort of the key trends. The latest Visual Networking Index were out just on the 6th of June. So all of the numbers I have here are global numbers, because we haven't had sort of Europe numbers broken down yet, but everything is available online, where you can also, if you just Google Cisco VNI, you'll get all the information, where you can also get more sort of granular information for some of the key EU countries, but Europe level numbers, unfortunately, we don't have yet. Anyway, I think the key thing really here is global IP traffic will continue to explode. It's continuing to increase. A trend that we've been seeing over a number of years, but that is increasing even more, is that busy hour traffic is increasing a lot more than average traffic. So busy hour traffic is actually going to increase by a factor of 4.6. Whereas average traffic will increase just by a factor of over 2. So why is that happening? What does that mean? Well, one of the reasons is that video is really exploding. So video will be 82% of all IP, globally, of all IP traffic by 2020. And this covers all video, so IP video on demand, internet video, live streaming, but also video conferencing, and increasingly also M2M kind of video. So it's videos is not just one thing; it's many things. But a huge chunk of it will be sort of consumer video, and of course, when do people watch video? When they come home from work in the evening. So that will have a significant impact on networks. The other sort of really key trend, again, this is nothing new. The number of devices is also exploded. There will be 3 times more devices in 2020 than the global population. And one of the big reasons of this, of course, is M2M. And one of the things that's interesting actually in terms of M2M and the number of IP connected devices is that Europe is actually one of the regions where there's a bigger proportion. So already for the 2014 numbers, it was already predicted to be 50% of all devices. So again, I don't have the latest numbers for what the exact European number will be, but already before. So globally, the number of devices per capita will be 3.6, whereas actually it was already 4.1 in our latest in last year's VNI for Europe. So this is just to say, actually Europe is at the forefront of innovation into the digitized society, Industry 4.0, digitization of all the verticals. And here it's just 12 examples of really all of the main verticals of all the kind of things to be connected. Connected home is actually a really important and very high growth vertical. Of course, there are connected cities, you've got the connected car. In Europe, that's already very much top of mind. But again, also energy, manufacturing, Industry 4.0. And this will have also a really big, important impact on the kind of networks that we will be needing, but also the complexity of the networks and the kind of traffic and the kind of data that will have to be transmitted over the networks and the kind of technical requirements those different kinds of traffic, those different kind of services and applications will have. So why am I talking about VNI? Well, we're supposed to be talking about EU net neutrality, and I will talk about EU net neutrality now. But I thought that it was actually really valuable just to do very high level those two slides, because, you know, for Cisco as a tech company, as an IT company, as a networking technology company, we very much believe in digitization. We very much believe in the IP-based network. We were one of the key innovators of IP-based networking. We support having EU-level net neutrality rules. First of all, to avoid EU fragmentation. We began to see countries, the Netherlands and Slovenia, adopting laws, and we believe in the digital single market. We're very sad to see that the UK has voted to leave the EU. So therefore, we supported having an EU-level law. And secondly, we supported having the ban against bad behavior. We completely support the ban against blocking and throttling, the ban against anti-competitive behavior. But at the same time, because we're seeing all of these developments, it's also really important for us that the EU net neutrality rules enable and provide the room and the flexibility to develop those kind of services to sit alongside internet access services. And actually, we were pretty pleased with the EU regulation. It was a lot of hard work. It took a long time. And Peter will, know a lot more than any of us in the room, probably how difficult those negotiations were, not just between the member states, but also between the member states and the European Parliament. So it was a really, really delicate balance that was struck in the compromise that then was approved as the EU net neutrality regulation. And now we have the BEREC draft guidelines, and we've had some very interesting discussions in the first part of the day today. But I really think, okay, we all have in this room different opinions around how do we define net neutrality, what does net neutrality mean, what would we ideally have liked to have seen in the regulation. But the point is, we have a regulation now. It's been politically agreed, and the draft guidelines should implement that. It shouldn't under-implement it, it shouldn't over-implement it, it should implement it. And there are just a few areas where actually we feel that there is a risk that some of the draft language in the regulation could skew that balance a little bit and actually put some of the innovation at risk in Europe. So again, Europe is actually at the forefront of a lot of the innovation in the area of M2M. It's also been at the forefront of more sort of well-known kind of services which would probably be specialized services under the EU regulation. So IPTV is one example, managed VoIP or voice over LTE. And one of the things, and this is very interesting when we're having this conversation today, actually one of the things that we believe that we see in the market on a commercial level is that telcos and OTTs are increasingly going into partnership with each other. It's not a battle, it's not telcos versus OTTs, because they need each other. OTTs need telcos if they want to deliver services with specific QoS attached to them, and telcos need OTTs to drive data and traffic to their networks. And if we want IoT, Industry 4.0, telemedicine, like no one in the digitized world will be able to do it all on their own. We all need each other. We all need to collaborate. Networking technology companies, telcos, application providers, startups, we all need to work together. This isn't going to happen if we think that one part of the value chain is bad or is not needed. So just to briefly go, and not to go sort of too much into the specifics in terms of the legal text, but there are just a couple of points, two paragraphs where we're a little bit worried about some of the language in the draft guidelines. And one is the paragraph that says that it is understood that specialized services are delivered through connections that are logically separate and that use strict admission control. Those are technology mandates. That was debated. That was part of the European Parliament's definition of what a specialized service is. There was this very long debate around how do we define a specialized service. It was agreed that we actually don't define a specialized service. We call it a service other than an internet access service. And there was very much an agreement to not include technology mandates, because how you deliver services is continuously evolving, and the regulation, we wanted it to be future-proof. So we're a little bit worried to see technology mandates and being introduced in the draft guidelines, because frankly, we don't see the legal basis in the regulation to do so. And the problem is that it actually could potentially exclude kind of services that can't be delivered as specialized services. And to take an example, strict admission control is a delivery mechanism that's used, one, to control is the user authorized to access this service, and two, it's to allocate the specific rate that service needs, which means that it's really primarily used for real-time services, and in particular video that have high rates to ensure that you have the capacity that's needed. But if we're talking about the IoT world and the M2M, a lot of that, so it'll be half of the devices, it'll be 4% of traffic. It's not about rates, and there are other ways that you can ensure whether the receiving computer or device has the right to access that service. So what would that then mean? Would that mean that we can't deliver services that are IoT services that need specific QoS? So we're worried about that. I don't know why it's not changing. It's just a bit slow. Okay. The other one that we're a little bit worried about is the language that tries to explain what the guidelines believe optimization where necessary means. And we're a little bit worried about it because it seems to imply that there's one level of quality that a service requires, but there can be several levels of quality. The point is, if you want something that goes beyond the best effort, then you need to deliver it as a specialized service, because it can't be an IAS, because IAS is inherently going to be best effort. And we actually think that the recital in the regulation, as well as the Commission statement that was attached to the regulation, as asked by the member states in Coreper, that the meaning of that wording is to provide a safeguard that you don't just take an IAS, relabel it, call it a specialized service, charge more for it, but there's no enhanced level of quality. That, of course, is not allowed. It shouldn't be allowed. But we are quite worried that this wording goes way beyond and creates sort of, I don't know, maybe public interest type of verification is too far. But frankly, for us, it's very clear in the regulation. I think this is what Peter said. There's freedom to provide internet access services. There are safeguards that they can't negatively impact the quality of internet access services. And that's it. And then just very final, because I'm seeing I only have one minute left. The other one, and we can come back to this, because I think this is also something that was already beginning to be discussed quite extensively in the morning session. Reasonable traffic management. We completely agree with the language in the regulation. We think it's legally and technically sound. It should be transparent, proportionate. It should be. It can't be based on commercial considerations. It should be based on the technical objective requirements of different kinds of traffic. And you can differentiate based on traffic classes as long as you treat equivalent types of traffic equally. Fine, absolutely fine. It then also says that it can't be maintained longer than necessary. And then the guidelines say we see this as a proportionality issue, because when you do traffic management, it's something that happens on an ongoing basis. It's how you configure your network. There isn't a person sitting in a control room somewhere pushing the on and the off button. So that's really helpful that they try to explain that as proportionality. But then it suddenly adds that if it's permanent and recurring, then it's not reasonable anymore. And again, for us, that risks creating an additional condition, because it is permanent in the sense that, again, it's how you've configured your networks. Of course, you can change your configuration, and you might want to change your configuration as the behavior in the network and changes, but you're not going to do it on a day-to-day basis. You're not going to do it on a month-to-month basis. And again, we don't see that there's a legal basis. If people can point to me in the regulation where it says permanent and recurring, then that's fine. But I do not see it. We do not see where that is in the regulation. And frankly, it risks undermining the otherwise very sound legal and technical language that's in both the provision itself and also in recital 9. So, hope that was not too much over time. So just very short, we think again that the regulation was a very balanced outcome. We have these 3 main concerns with the guidelines, and we think that should be changed so that we ensure that the guidelines and the regulations are aligned, and that the guidelines really, they implement the regulation and they don't go above and beyond that. It's not about whether you agree or don't agree with the regulation. I mean, there are also things in the regulation that maybe we would have worded slightly differently, but where we accept the political decision was taken on that point, and that's it. So yeah, that's it. Happy to discuss more afterwards.
Okay, it's me again without PowerPoint. And again, I wrote my bullet points in last 30 seconds, as usual. All right, specialized services. When I saw that in Telecom Singles Market Directive, I was like, what is this? Did anyone define what is a specialized service? I've been working in telecom industry for a long time, and I know that we had specialized services in a circuit environments, and specialized service usually meant in telecom environment that you need to pay a lot of money for it. So why is specialized services coming to the internet right now? I thought we were past that point, and we would never drag back this old-fashioned model of getting more money from people. But okay, then I was thinking, okay, if they well define what specialized services actually are, and if they can keep them in the walled gardens inside the operators, this might as well be something that might be useful. So for example, I'm at home, I'm connected to a telecom network with fiber to the home, and my IPTV works fine because it's in a probably prioritized VLAN, and my phone works fine because it's in prioritized VLAN, and I'm happy with that. I'm a happy customer. And if this is a specialized service, then I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem. And if, I don't know, a surgeon wants to do a surgery across the internet, and if Telecom builds the specialized VLAN across their network to do this, then I'm fine with that, as long as it doesn't touch the internet. But if we are talking about internet access services, the internet, that is today, as we heard, best effort internet, and everybody is equal, right? Everybody was a hippie at some point in time. Then we are talking about some different stuff. So if you all of a sudden declare that you can have specialized services in the traffic, inside the traffic that is today best effort, then we are opening the can of worms, or Pandora box, or however you want to call it. Because the the interpretation of what can be or what cannot be or what must not be a specialized service will go just wild. At the end, I'm sure that somebody will manage to use some legal lingo and persuade everybody else that Google YouTube is a specialized service. I'm sure, sooner or later. I'm traveling a lot in Africa, for example. I was thinking if that would be legally allowed in Africa, how inventive would people go there? And I believe we would go also, right? So, and my question is how you detect it. If you say something is specialized service, how you detect it? Or you use DPI, that Andrei will probably start jumping up and down, that then you get all the data from all your users and you start collecting the big data and you can start analyzing all sorts of stuff. Or somebody that is paying for prioritization of the traffic uses the marking and QoS marking. And actually, if I think like a hacker, I would love to see this, because when the first person pays to the operator to prioritize their traffic, and I will receive the packet, I will open my Wireshark and I will look into the packet and see the code, the marking, be sure that all my packets from my servers will be in the highest prioritization queue. All of them. And I'm not the only one. Other people will start painting their packets in preferred color that they will discover. So all of a sudden, all of the packets would be the same color again. And we are in the best effort again. Unless those who can't, who don't know how to, but they will fairly quickly learn how to paint all the packets pink, right? Then we heard about reasonable traffic management. What is a reasonable traffic management? I'm sure vendors are very happy with the reasonable traffic management because, you know, bigger boxes and bigger things. But I had once a long discussion with Randy Bush about this stuff. And, you know, what is the internet? The internet is all about building reliable network out of unreliable devices. And if you need failover, you have bad design. And same goes for QoS. Operators are paid to carry traffic, to carry packets around. QoS is all about deciding which packets we are going to drop. You are not paid to drop packets, you are paid to carry packets around. Please understand that. You're not paid to drop packets. This is bad. This is not going good, right? And there is no replacement for capacity. If we want to enhance the internet, if you want to make it bigger, better, faster, there is no need for QoS. We just need enough capacity. In ideal world, every packet would go through in the same time. And we should look into the way of developing the capacity, developing the bandwidth, developing the fast switching core, simple fast switching core on the internet. Because internet is all about a very simple, stupid core and very intelligent edge. When we start putting the intelligence to the core, that's very telco mentality. If we put too much intelligence in the core, it becomes very expensive and very complex to run. So please try to keep the intelligence on the edge and try to keep internet as a very fast, stupid switching network. And let's send packets around without too much complication. Okay, thank you.
There we are. But can you hear me? I believe so. Good. Yeah, this is going to be tough, particularly in the 10 minutes that are starting now, because I will, in a way, not follow this log, because I believe that we will not enhance a common understanding if we mix together internet access and traffic management therein with specialized services. Both in the regulation and in the guidelines, those two issues are separated, and therefore what I'm going to present here is also first going to focus on specialized services and then on traffic management. And I see no reason either in the regulation or the guidelines to combine those two. First, specialized services. So the big idea behind this, there are actually two ideas. The one is that specialized services should not deteriorate the quality of normal internet access. And here we have a problem in the guidelines in paragraph 118, which is, in my eyes, the one point where the guidelines differ the most from the actual regulation and from the will of the legislator. Other parts are really good, but here I think we have serious problems. And these problems come apparent if we look at Article 3.5, which clearly requires specialized services not to deteriorate the quality of internet access from end users. And this becomes even more clear if we look at the legislative history. I'm sure Mr. Ebel can also confirm this. From the trilogue negotiations, the word other used to be in the sentence, but was deleted in one of the final negotiations. And so here we even have a legislative history we can point to why an internet access service should not cannibalize the bandwidth of my normal internet. Because it's also a double selling of capacity. An internet provider is basically selling you the same thing twice. And it clearly is not the intention of the legislator here. Secondly, paragraph 118 is also contradicting the articles on transparency, because they clearly define how an internet access product has to be specified, even in the contract. You know, these are contractual obligations between the user and the ISP. And the way BEREC interprets specialized services, they would actually go against this specification. And it's not even contradicting the articles, it's also contradicting their own implementation of the article in paragraph 142 and 144. And as a final case on this, even if we accept the premise that under certain conditions, let's say XDSL and television, you really seriously cannot expand the capacity, and there is a physical limit because of the distance between the subscriber and the next hub, so you really cannot expand capacity. Even then, in such cases where you have to accept quality deterioration, there is a valid question to make: why is the minimum speed here the criteria, not the normally available speed? Because clearly it would make more sense if the user always gets what he's paying for, instead of just reducing it up to the bottom line, to the absolute minimum. There's of course the bigger problem that is not as detailed in the guidelines. I don't think we have that much of a problem here, but it's very important for the general understanding of specialized services as such. Because the big danger, which is always the thing that we've been pointing to from the beginning, specialized services, we're not against them. They can legitimately exist. If there is room for innovation for services which really require this special treatment, then they may exist. The only thing where we are objecting to is if normal online services are reclassified as specialized services. If you give priority to a service that could also function over the open internet. And here, it's all about this reclassification, which we have to prevent. And again, if we look at the regulation, we have Article 3.5 that says there has to be an optimization. And then we have the next subparagraph, which says this optimization has to be necessary. And in the recital, we even find a more detailed nuance on that it has to be objectively necessary and assessed by the NRA. Only then can a specialized service be provisioned. And in principle, it means if a service can function on the open internet, if a service cannot function on the open internet, everything is green, it is allowed as a specialized service. But if this service could function over the internet, then it circumvents the ban in the regulation on paid fast lanes. There's some, the reason why I'm saying this is actually paragraph 102 and 104 of the draft guidelines, because there, those paragraphs can be read in a way that the quality requirements are actually not set by the NRA objectively. Instead, they are set by the CUP or by the ISP, or in paragraph 104, they are just defined by the contractual obligations. And again, here we find solid arguments legally in the regulation that it has to be the key feature which has objectively to be assessed by the NRA, and not just the CUP or the ISP that randomly declare that this service has to have such and such quality requirements. And that's also important if we think about distinctions like constant bitrate or variable bitrate. So if a service adapts to the actual requirement, or if I say I have now the crystal clear Skype or the ultra HD 4K video, just tweaking the quality requirements in that way, in our views, would go against the regulation and would not be a legitimate specialized service. And also when it's about contractual obligations, if I just write in my terms of services that this service has to be assured in these and these amounts, I know Cisco would really love that, because that is a really good argument for them to sell more equipment. But again, this is not covered by the regulation, because in recital 16, when it speaks about giving quality assurance to the end user, there is an end and there is a corresponding. So both mean, first there has to be the objective assessment by the NRA, and only if this is coming out positive, you can give the quality assurances to the end user. That's it on specialized services. Now really fast on traffic management. Here again, the basic premises. Traffic management should be as application agnostic as possible. And because I know this will come, this application agnosticism is not just best effort. If we look at the full scope of those measures, we see that it contains both best effort but also consumption-based models, like Comcast is using in the US, and it's also containing user-controlled quality of service. So these systems are the law in the US since 2008 and in Canada since 2009. We have Comcast as one of the biggest internet providers in the US, publicly on record in Congress, saying that they don't have a problem with that. And application agnosticism is not just a nice concept that preserves the way the internet works, it is also something that has proven to work and which ensures the level playing field of the internet. On the other side, application-specific measures, we have two types in principle. We have objective classes that are formed based on the quality of service requirements of the application. For example, this application is sensitive to delay or jitter or packet loss. And we have functionality, we have classes that are based on the functionality. For example, all video streaming, all YouTube and Netflix or voice over IP. And we have classes based on those. And there are inherent problems with class-based traffic management. So what the regulation leaves us with is this hierarchy in Article 3.3. And the basic principle, the y-axis if you want, is that all measures have to be proportionate, necessary, transparent, and non-discriminatory. And this then leaves us with these three types of traffic management measures. Application agnostic, according to subparagraph 1. Reasonable traffic management measures based on quality of service requirement classes, subparagraph 2. And only in exceptional or temporary cases we can resort to exceptional measures which can be based on the application type, like the functionality or the protocol. So this is the nice concept that the legislator laid out for us. And why is their proportionality the highest criterion that I've listed there? Because there are inherent problems when you let ISPs classify packages into quality of service requirements. Of course, they could distort competition by just classification, or for example, gaming is prioritized, but voice over IP is not, because I want the people to use my own telephony service, which is more expensive. Could be unintentional misclassification, just because there is innovation on the application layer. We have HTTP live streaming or MPEG-Dash, and that looks like HTTP and is misclassified. We have, therefore, a problem with innovation, because what do you do if your application is misclassified by some ISP in some other European country? You know, where do you go? Do you go to the regulator? Do you go to all these ISPs at once as a small startup, which does not even have a lawyer? So there are problems here. Of course, class-based traffic management is always intransparent for the user and the CAP, because it's really complex to understand which application is in which class. Even for a technician, that requires extensive monitoring, let alone for a regulator. With class-based traffic management, we risk discriminating against encrypted traffic. I know there are good provisions in the guidelines that try to prevent that, but really they are mute. Because if you allow class-based traffic management, and if you have encrypted connections, if you have Tor, if you have users that use VPN, you will always misclassify those, because you cannot look inside the encryption. You cannot understand what's in the encrypted data stream. So there will inherently be always discrimination against encrypted traffic if we allow this model to perpetuate. And therefore, it also harms individual users and how they want to utilize their internet connection. User-controlled quality of service regimes would be much better in that regard. And at the end, particularly for the NRAs, it creates regulatory overload, because you'll be the guys that have to deal with the outfall of that. So that leaves me back with this threefold hierarchy and with the actual assessment. So how has BEREC implemented that? For the exceptional measures, they've done everything
I really
right.
have to ask you to...
I'm going to really be fast.
Because you're double at the moment already.
So for the exceptional measures, they've done an excellent job. For the reasonable measures, they have failed in all regards. So there, you don't have to first use application agnostic measures before you can resort to class-based. And they've even not taken this quality of service requirement into consideration. So you can base the classes basically on everything in the reasonable measures. Paragraph 63 has huge problems and should be fixed. There would be more to say about just one brief point. Even in the 2011 guidelines, BEREC has already acknowledged that application agnostic measures are more proportionate. And final point, there is also a requirement in recital 9 which requires that such class-based measures cannot be the default way of network design. You cannot have always on class-based traffic management. It should be always as application agnostic as possible, and only in cases where those measures are exhausted and haven't resolved the problem can you resort to class-based measures. And that's also in the Article 3.3 subparagraph 3. It says that you should not discriminate between classes of applications, and BEREC acknowledged that in paragraph 71. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I really ask speakers to stick to the limit, because, okay, I can tolerate a few minutes, but you, well, double your time. Is it? Try.
Well, I can use this one probably.
Okay.
Thank you. Now? Thank you. Is it okay? No?
Not yet.
You can use mine. I try this one. Third is the charm. Okay, thank you. Now we should.
Yeah, this is on.
It's again. You know, I will. Again, a bit wander outside the direct question, and then I will come back. I remember at the time when this telecom single market was preparing and when it was accepted, and it's how it echoed in Slovenia. You know, then we read that it's the end of the internet, that net neutrality is the cost for the roaming regulation. And today the industry reads it, and we simply do not know for first what it really means. That's why the better guidelines are so important. And some are saying are going below, some above, some are just not strict enough or some not clear enough. So one of the major things I would like to then also to ask other speakers is, can somebody define really actually, if we would list, let's say, 15 like specialized services, would we agree at least, or would the BEREC and the European Commission agree which is allowed and under which condition and which is not? And kind of the same is with the traffic management. Again, coming from the Slovenian operators, in a case that we would read that it will be something wrong, or at least we are not doing anything, absolutely anything, and now we are again hearing it will be the end of the internet, what are we doing? So first of all, I would really like to see this interpretation, because the special services as a term is not even used in the regulation, as is zero rating not. So it all comes to these shadows I was speaking before of the interpretations of the discretions. So it would be one pledge to all relevant stakeholders to at least define exactly what it means, and that the same discretion, same interpretations of it would be used throughout the European Union. Because now we will have the situation that all 27 or 28 NRAs might decide differently, and we will again see the situation where Slovenian operators will be one among hundreds maybe in the European Union that might have a different situation than the others. And we are already small, and our business cases did suffer in the past. So I would really like to see, I was of course reading, I'm not following just net neutrality. It is one of the 20 priorities we have in Slovenia. We are against small operators. We have to deal with enormous amount of all the regulatory scopes, and as Mr. Schmidt said, Wild West, and he was referring to the operators. I still haven't found one argument about the industry which would have more regulation than the telco industry. And this TSM is of course coming not to simplify this one. And it's opening a lot of questions. So maybe I would just pass the floor if somebody from BEREC or the Commission could discuss, beside two examples that were given, which is VoLTE and linear IPTV, which else would be considered as the specialized service. I'm coming from the mobile world. One specific, just to raise the point, and we will not agree for sure in the panel, would it be allowed that we reserve a part of the spectrum for a fixed mobile substitution that the regulator described, prescribed us when we took the spectrum in 2014? So would this be a specialized service? And I can go on and on, but just to a bit spur a debate about the technicalities, about what in reality specialized services mean, and how will the European Commission or BEREC or whomever take action, or how they take actions when we will see the different interpretations by the NRAs in the member states. So I may be sorry, Leonard, I maybe put questions that you should be asking, but this is I just want to make a point that we actually do not know what is at the end the most important for us, what is allowed and what is not allowed. And of course, you can refer to my previous, because I was signing that zero rating is allowed, and I got the penalty was not given, it was just a reminder or whatever. So, but it was banished. So I would also like to talk about that one. How will we make sure that the same specialized services are considered by different national regulators the same, so that this single market I was talking of will truly be single, and that all the operators will have a level playing field? And maybe I will go later to the OTTs, but you don't want that. So thank you.
There's also a question, can you zero rate a specialized service?
Yes, of course.
Good question. I think it's a fair question.
That's a simple answer, yes.
Because you have flat rate voice.
I will have a few slides to my presentation in this part. In this presentation, I will try to bridge between the legal language. Can you make full screen? Okay. I will try to bridge between the legal language and technical implementation without going too much into detail. There have been many good questions, good remarks today. I cannot answer about the details about BEREC's regulation, BEREC's guidelines, what should be amended here and there. That would take too much time, and I'm not representing BEREC here today, as I told you. But my takeaway from the discussion in the morning is that there is a need for more structure in our dialogue here, and my first slide with some further content is very close to one slide presented by Thomas about different types of traffic management, and I think this is a way of structuring the understanding of how traffic management could be implemented by operators, and then what kind of specialized services that could be provided. But I don't think BEREC nor regulators can give a clear answer in advance that this and that should be done and this and that is prohibited, because that would stifle the innovation in the market. So I think there should be, of course, freedom for the operators to implement traffic management, for example, in the network, in line with the regulation, without the regulator saying in detail how we should do it. I don't think that would be the correct way if we should do that. I will discuss briefly 3 levels of traffic management of internet access services. The ground level, second and third level, and this is similar to what Thomas mentioned. And afterwards, finally, I will take a short discussion about specialized services and traffic management in that regard. And that would not be a 4th level, but it would be a parallel, you could say, to the internet access service. The ground level, the basic level of traffic management, is described in the first subparagraph of Article 3.3, and it's about agnostic handling of applications and endpoints. And this is the traditional best effort traffic management. This has been mentioned many times before today. An aspect of best effort traffic handling, which is not mentioned and which is actually very important and is not so well understood by non-technicians, because it's a rather hidden function. It's called congestion control, or as BEREC guidelines call them, endpoint-based congestion control, because this is a function that executes in the endpoints, which is a function where you, when you have your smartphone or laptop, you communicate towards the internet. The communication will slow down if there is not sufficient capacity. So this means that there is a built-in mechanism to limit the amount of congestion in the network. This depends on the transport layer protocol you are using, TCP versus UDP, and the transport layer executes together with the application layer. So it's a function more or less integrated with the application. We also have advanced congestion control functions developed by IETF today. I mentioned a few of those here. I will of course not go into these details, but as you can notice, there is this RMCAT technology, which is a part of the RTC web function, which is the upcoming voice provisioning on the internet, which is particularly relevant. And as you can see, there is a large emphasis on limiting the traffic into the network in the internet community in order to assist this function, which could also be implemented in the network. When this is implemented in the network, it's called congestion management, and there is a regulation of that. But as long as this function mentioned on this slide, called congestion control, is mentioned is handled in the endpoint, this is not regulated, and this is for the application provider to add this function to his application. This is an important function that has prevented congestion collapse, which we had in early days on the internet, and it's also today significantly reducing the amount of congestion on the internet. The second level of traffic management is the so-called reasonable traffic management, described in the second subparagraph. In this case, the regulation allows operators to provide categories of traffic, and which has been mentioned already, these categories are to be based on quality of service requirements. But typically, applications also refer to quality of service requirements, so it's in many cases possible to link applications to these categories. But it's the quality of service requirements that are the basis for the categories. And a typical example would be real-time communication, which could be such a category of traffic. The regulation also limits what operators can do for this traffic when they put traffic into these categories. They are not allowed to monitor specific content, which is the word used in the regulation, and this is clarified by BEREC guidelines to mean transport layer protocol payload. So this means in effect that typically deep packet inspection would not be allowed in order to handle reasonable traffic management. ISPs will have to rely on information provided in packet headers, IP layer and transport layer, and this also implicitly gives an aspect of this function which relate to the application or the end user, because it's the traffic sent from the application that is handled in these categories. This reasonable traffic management, if implemented by the operator, can then provide some level of positive differentiation, but as the rules and the guidelines explain, the goal of this is to optimize the overall transmission quality, which means if there are different categories, you have to take the overall view in order to handle the categories. A negative differentiation in those kinds of blocking and throttling, etc., would not be allowed under reasonable traffic management. That would be the exceptions, which are the third level of traffic management. This third level is called traffic management going beyond reasonable traffic management, and they were mentioned earlier today by Peter in the first session, that there are 3 specific exceptions, and I'll not use time to repeat these. But I will emphasize the last one, the congestion management measure, which is very similar to congestion control, but congestion management is handled internally in the network, where the operator can limit the amount of traffic. But there are clear limitations to what extent these exceptions can be used. The recitals describe that they should use the general criteria of strict interpretation and proportionality if they do exceptional traffic management. And it also explains in the regulation that it can only be applied as necessary and as long as necessary, which means that these exceptions, they are more limited in the use than the reasonable traffic management. And it's also important when it comes to the proportionality that there are 2 ways of doing this congestion management, also mentioned by Thomas earlier, either application agnostic or application specific. And application specific traffic management would of course be a more extensive way of doing this. So according to the proportionality principle, application agnostic should be used if possible. Only if necessary, you can go on to the next step of traffic management. Finally, about specialized services. Specialized services are not new. They have been there all the time. There have never been any prohibition of specialized services. So what the lawmakers wanted to do, as far as I can understand, was to maintain this opportunity to provide specialized services and of course also to develop new specialized services. So these specialized services, they ensure kind of a comparability between net neutrality regulation and quality of service-based services. Typically, we have seen lots of discussions recently about 4G and 5G networks, whether that would be prohibited by the European net neutrality regulation, and in my understanding, there is a clear compatibility as long as specialized services are used. And sometimes there seems to be a misunderstanding about these specialized services, but there is a distinction, of course, between Internet Access Service and specialized services. So specialized services is not a new type of Internet Access Services. There is a clear distinction, and what the regulation says is that Internet Access Services are safeguarded from the specialized services. So this is a regulation that safeguards the Internet Access Service, as the aim of the regulation explains clearly. On the other hand, specialized services, if you want to provide quality of service, you need to do something in order to do that, but you should not use the Internet access as a buffer for adding capacity for the service. The specialized service contains their own protection mechanism, which is what BEREC tried to describe in their guidelines. Somehow, specialized services need to have a very particular kind of traffic management in order to be provided and guarantee the quality of service. There was a challenge from the industry that BEREC should explain exactly what kind of specialized services you can provide. I think it's the other way around. It's the ISPs that provide these services, and then they provide information to regulators about the services. Regulators can also measure the performance of the Internet access to see whether it is degraded, and based on this, regulatory assessment can be done. As you can read from the regulation, NRAs shall closely monitor and ensure compliance of the regulation. So, in particular regarding specialized services, we depend a lot on operators to have information from them about the services in order to do this assessment. Thank you.
Okay, I think I will respond to some of the comments which have been made, and maybe a general statement at the beginning. I think the Commission has closely cooperated with BEREC in this elaboration of these guidelines, and we are fine with a very large part of the guidelines. Where we have different views, we have expressed them to BEREC, and we will discuss that, of course, with BEREC. But we are very much in favor of what has been put for public consultation. I would like to discuss first the specialized services and then the reasonable traffic management. I think one point Kate mentioned was the partnerships between OTTs and telcos. And we have, this is reflected in the regulation that both content providers and telecom providers can provide specialized services or services other than Internet Access Service, but I think as it is expressed in the BEREC guidelines, specialized service is a term which has been used in the public debate and which is much shorter than other services than Internet Access Service. Why is there no definition? Well, there were attempts in the I think the Commission proposal had a definition, and the Parliament first reading vote also had a definition, but the Council didn't want to have a definition because the Council's approach was to have a principle-based approach, which is more open, and therefore the notion of services other than Internet Access Service. That's the reason why there is no definition, and I think it would be contrary to the intention of the co-legislators in their compromise to reintroduce a definition now in the BEREC guidelines. We have also heard criticism to some elements of this definition today, so I think there we have to respect what the co-legislators have decided. Examples of whether voice over LTE or managed IPTV are specialized services. Yes, they can qualify as specialized service if there's a quality guarantee, and but of course subject to all the conditions, that there's no detriment to the internet access service, and of course, let's say this has all to comply with the other obligations on the provider. So if you have spectrum licenses which say you can't reserve capacity, then there has to be found a way to find a way to make it viable. But a priori, they can qualify and would meet the requirements of Article 3.5, subparagraph 1, and then they have to be subject to the requirements that they should not have a detrimental effect on the internet access service quality. Then there was one criticism or one point raised against specialized services, that ISPs would try to get more money from people basically for the same service. This is one of the main concerns which were seen by several member states in the Council and also by the Parliament, and there are clear provisions that this is avoided, or prevented. There is a statement or a clear sentence which says that specialized services shall not be a substitute to internet access service, and which is interpreted in the recital as can't be that the service is shifted from from a free internet service available over the open internet to become a paid service with the same quality and without any quality guarantee as a specialized service. Then there was a question whether specialized services can be within the internet access service. No, I think the concept of the legal text is quite clear, that specialized services are services other than internet access service, so there are no specialized services within the internet access service. However, there is of course a shared capacity of both, which is it is possible to share the capacity between or use capacity for both specialized services and internet access services. So it's not necessary to have a separate physical network or infrastructure for specialized services, but you can use parts of the infrastructure for both, and you can be flexible in the allocation. But as Frode and others said, there must be a guaranteed quality of the internet access or the capacity available for internet access service. So specialized services cannot eat too much into the quality or into the capacity available for internet access services. Then someone said that quality of service is about dropping packets. I would disagree with that statement. I think rather that quality of service is about guaranteeing quality. Dropping packets is rather an issue of congestion management. And if you have, following the approach of the specialized services, that they should ensure sufficient capacity to have no negative impact on the quality of internet access service, then it's not about dropping packets, but it's making sure that you get the quality, but you should not have a negative impact on internet access service quality. So that means exactly that you should not drop the internet access packets. Then I think it was hotly debated whether optimization should be necessary and who determines that. Our reading, and I think that's reflected in the regulation, is that the first call for the setting of the specialized service quality is done by the operator, because it's him who brings up the new service on the market and who gives the commitment or the guarantee on what quality is assured. And therefore, it's the operator which sets in the first place the quality requirements. But this is fully reviewable by the NRA, so it's in full control of the NRA. But this is, in our view, the only way how it can work, because it would not be very innovation friendly if the NRA were to set what kind of new services would be allowed and what kind would not be allowed before giving the chance to operators to test this. Then the question on DPI and how to recognize or identify the specialized service packets. Now DPI is, as a general thing, is not allowed, or monitoring specific content, which is similar to the approach of DPI, is not allowed in a daily traffic management, so you can't just filter everything in order to identify the specialized service packets. That brings me to the reasonable traffic management. I would disagree with the risk of discrimination due to the category-based traffic differentiation, because the differentiation can only be on the basis of objective technical requirements of the traffic and of the applications, not by the, let's say, by the categories which are convenient for the network operator. Then, as I said, there is no monitoring of specific content, which is clarified in the Berry guidelines. And then discrimination against encrypted traffic. There is one or two statements in the guidelines which clearly say you cannot be discriminated by reason of being encrypted. So that means if there are reasons to treat this traffic differently on the basis of the information contained in the header, this is of course admissible, but you cannot say because it's encrypted we put it in the waiting loop and therefore it will be treated worse. Then two more points regarding the as necessary, or can be a reasonable traffic management can be applied as long as it is necessary. This is a clear time scale proportionality requirement, and if you have permanent reasonable traffic management measures, then it's very hard to show that this is all the time necessary, because if that were the case, then I think the necessity test would be superfluous somehow. But if an operator can demonstrate that, then it's possible, and the Berry guidelines, I checked the wording now, say in such a situation it would be questionable whether the necessity test is met, and I think this is exactly the right term. It's questionable and it's hard to show, but it is possible. So it's not impossible to prove that for an operator. Last point on the questions on the enforcement or similar enforcement across the EU. Well, we have the Berry guidelines, which shall ensure or shall contribute to ensure a consistent application across the Union. And then we have still the treaty powers of the Commission. If a member state does not properly enforce or does over-enforce beyond the wording of the regulation, of course, not necessarily the guidelines, but if there's a member state behavior in terms of monitoring or enforcement regarding the regulation, then the Commission can open infringement proceedings as with any other EU legislation. Thank you.
So I can sense people are getting tired, so I only have 2 slides. I just want to take a quick observation here. If anyone feels that this discussion about specialized services has become excessive or absurd, almost Kafkaesque, I certainly feel that way. I think this is the reason why I support soft rules. I think what this is becoming is a grotesque over-regulation of a very modern competitive market, asymmetric regulation in the wrong way. In 1999, the EU had a green paper saying that telecom regulation was completely out of date. We've had convergence for 40 years. 1999, it was already out of date. We should be having less regulation now in telecom. We have more. We've gone so far in the other direction, I honestly don't know where we are. So the fact that the internet has exploded the way that it is today, people have more data than they can possibly do with. We have more devices than people on the internet itself is the proof that the internet is open, that the telecom network could spawn its very own competitor. Doesn't that seem to count for something? I find it significant today, the UK leaving. The UK has also been part of the BEREC leadership process along with Norway. I would think it would be very interesting which way the UK decides to go, because Ofcom had a set of soft rules. In fact, amongst any regulator, they probably did more to bring key performance indicators to their particular measurement. And I suspect, what I will wager is that the UK will take a different approach than the EU, and they have a good reason. A lot of the innovation from the EU comes from the UK. There's a tremendous amount of internet companies. They make a lot of money, and I think they wanted something different for their ecosystem. So But I want to make a quick slide for you just to give a top level to try to think about this policy, the way we're going. There is a BEREC consultation. It's something that I use with my students where we talk about what is a good policy. How do you know that you have created a good policy? How do you ensure that you make a good policy? And there's just a checklist. And I think this is perhaps a way to address. Yes, it is. There it is. It's just, yeah, thank you. Just to address how we could look at these particular items. Thank you. That's fine. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go here to the end. All right. Okay. One more. Oh, no. Okay. So what are the standards of a good policy? And does the policy we've adopted in the EU conform to a good policy? First of all, what's a good policy? It's aligned with the national laws and institutional goals. It's based on rational, comprehensive data and evidence, quantitative and qualitative. It has a framework for achieving the outcome. It's concise, clearly communicated, and widely understood. It creates value and benefits with measurable outcomes, and it's monitored, evaluated, and reviewed regularly. Now, I think if we take this framework and we look at the EU process, there are some things that have been done okay. We can recognize. There are probably things we can do better. But when we make a policy, we should have a way to determine that the policy is working. We should have a way to measure it, right? And if it's not working, we should be able to exit that policy. It should have what we call a sunset clause. So certainly the EU made the law. That is the law. The EU itself is the law. But what I will suggest to you, the way that I see net neutrality exploding around the world with lawsuits, we're going to see a lawsuit in India coming after their interpretations. I think that we're going to see lawsuits challenging net neutrality rules from competitive grounds, where even the edge providers themselves, the OTT companies, will start to say these rules are being anti-competitive to them. In terms of the BEREC interpretation of the EU, I think it is of a great concern that BEREC is introducing words that are not found in the EU legislation. If anybody has been to the Internet Governance Forum, you know there is a deep, very deep conflict about how do you define open internet, how do you define net neutrality, and it's not at all a settled matter, and I think it's significant that BEREC has introduced new terms that aren't found in the law. So, the EU itself, I think there is a place we can give them credit where it's due. They did do certainly better than the US. They did do some amount of fact-finding. They conducted a raid. European Commission conducted a raid on some large operators. They didn't find evidence of abuse. The European Parliament did a report. They said light touch regulation is the way to go. I wouldn't call what we have today light touch. In terms of BEREC, BEREC did 2 very significant surveys. We should give them some credit for that. But there's a difference between surveys and evidence. The survey that Frode was talking about, great survey, it was looking at the contract disclosures from about 400 or 500 operators. I commend you to read it. It's very interesting. These were the policies that the operators adopted and the contracts that said, these are some of the things we might do. We have put it in the contract giving us the ability to do it. We might never do it. Sometimes we do. That is not the same thing as to interpolate that things are actually happening. So there's a difference in the contract disclosures and what is actually evidence in the marketplace. What would have been ideal if BEREC had had the budget or the bandwidth, they could have gone out to actually test the survey data that they had developed and collected, which they even said themselves. The operators had been very forthcoming. They gave us a lot of data. We could characterize the marketplace, at least from the disclosure perspective. Then they could have actually gone out and said, do we actually see a blocking or throttling taking place? I understand that's water over the bridge at this point, but I'm saying it because here we are again with the BEREC consultation, setting up yet another layer of things. So, do we have a framework for achieving the outcome? I think if you read the EU law, it is it is quite a obtuse framework. It is a difficult framework. And if we can hear, what did BEREC say when they presented this? Chairman Eschweiler, he said, we create our guidelines based upon the best arguments from the stakeholders. The best arguments. So that's what he said. He said the best arguments, you know, the children and the elderly, I don't think they're in a position to make the best arguments of what kind of internet works for them. But there are business models of people who are trying to make the best arguments, and that's not necessarily what's best for everyone, maybe for certain constituencies, but that was what BEREC had disclosed. The other thing here is concise, clearly communicated, widely understood. I don't think that we have that. If BEREC says 0 rating is neither allowed nor prohibited, that doesn't leave us in a place of clarity. That's absurd. How can you allow and prohibit something? That is essentially turning a telecom regulator into an everlasting judge. I don't think that's a job they want. And then when you say end users should be free to agree with providers, that means freedom to contract. If you can give me data for free and I accept, that's a freedom. So we're here fighting about these things. Creates value and benefits with measurable outcomes. We don't have any metrics to measure this policy. Openness is something that's subject to judgment. This is a difficult road we're going down. I'm very concerned about that. Now, at last, monitored and evaluated and reviewed regularly. Now, I have no doubt BEREC will be excellent to collect reports from the telecom regulators around the EU. Now, I will tell you, I know from FCC for a fact, there are already small internet service providers in the United States that are getting ready to sell their companies because of the FCC rules. I know one personally he said, the reporting requirements, I can't do it. I have to hire another lawyer in my company just to send reports to the FCC. I'm going to sell my company. So there are those kinds of telecom operators here in the EU as well, MVNOs, small countries. They can't survive under this level of bureaucracy. So what is the net impact is that the big providers will buy the small ones, or they'll make who knows, with the kind of consolidation environment. But basically, no one wants to enter this marketplace to start it. There's no new mobile operators starting. Why would they? They need to have one person just to complete reports to send to BEREC every year on this issue, in addition to everything else. So I don't know if maybe some people who can understand the magnitude of the kind of reporting. This is my last slide here. There is an issue in the EU law that says technological neutrality, okay? You can argue that net neutrality is not technologically neutral because it's an asymmetric regulation that falls on one part of a very complex value chain, a complex ecosystem. The BEREC interpretation of the specialized services say that if you are an operator wanting to do voice over LTE, IPTV, or telemedicine, you're going to get more scrutiny than someone who's trying to do those services on the general internet. Now, that is tilting the favor away from the operators into someone else. I know that that's the goals of many people. I know that that's a lot of the goals of advocates who want these rules. But as an end user, as a person who might want to buy those services, there's very good reason why you want to use the operator's facilities for voice over LTE or telemedicine or IPTV. There are very good reasons for that. And it's not just, inherently bad because you do that. So, and the other thing this BEREC rule says, walled gardens are expressly outlawed. Well, there's very good groups. I personally would like a walled garden. I get a lot of garbage advertising, malware inside of there. I'd be happy to get a walled garden. For my children, I'd like a walled garden. For my parents, I'd like a walled garden. Okay, they would too. So there's a lot of things that, in the interest of keeping everything open and neutral, that's great. We might optimize those set of stakeholders and what they want, but we're marginalizing others who have other preferences. I believe both of those things could be optimized in a framework that was dynamic. It could allow for that. Operators could say, these are my open internet access products. Another one says, here's your dynamic internet access products. But that is not the decision that we've made here in the EU, unfortunately. But I would just like to suggest if there's any way we can take some restraint and step back from this grotesque overreach that we've made, I think it would be in the long run, in the short-term interest of many of us, and probably most consumers.
Then I have to find mine. So I will start to explain. This is the A. Where's the other one? Right here. So I want to start to explain a little bit, because I've been in this industry for 20 years, quoted in quite many media. And a lot of people very often ask me, John, can you tell me a little bit about this telecommunication, how it's working? And I want to enlighten you. You're a lot of smart people, a lot of you works in the industry. But I want to tell you a little bit what's the difference between 2G, 3G, 4G, and what will be 5G. So let me put it into a way so I think you can understand it. So in the old days, the operators built a network, a 2G network. In Europe, we decided to make a GSM standard. The agreement was signed in Copenhagen, and I was the 15th of September 1987 or something like that. It was driven very much by the Nordic regulators, Vodacom in England and a couple of other players, but basically the GSMA standards was created. Later on, 3G came. That was called 2G. Then we had 3G. And 3G came, and a lot of people believed that this would be something totally new. There would be a kind of a walled garden where the operators will double their ARPU, the average revenue per subscriber. So Ericsson and Nokia, they went out and said, because of 3G and all these new value-added services, the revenue for the mobile operators per average subscriber will double in 2016, or more than double. The reality is it's been declining since that. It didn't happen. These operators were stupid. They paid a lot of money for the license, and don't blame the governments for that, because no one forced these companies to buy these frequencies. Now we have 4G, and I don't know about you realize it, but in many countries, a lot of operators have said, now we implement 4G and we replace our whole network. And if you listen to some of these operators' capital market days, they actually say, we not only replace all our equipment in our whole network, but we do it without increasing our capex, our spending. And what's happening is that in the past we had a 2G base station and a 3G base station. Nowadays we have a base station which can run 2G, 3G, 4G. Nokia called them flexi base stations, Ericsson called them MBX 6000, and so on. And these base stations are much more intelligent. We go from hardware-based network to software-based network. So let me put it in a different way. At home, I live in an old building, very nice building, and in the morning when I take a shower, I turn on the hot water and the cold water, and I take the shower. And my neighbors sometimes do the same in the morning at the same time as I'm doing. The water pressure goes down, and what's happened to the water? Either it becomes very cold or it becomes very hot, depends on he's turning it on and off. I think we all realize that. A 2G network and a 3G network was like that, where you had these two, where you had a bathtub, and you adjusted it, and then you waited the water to fill up in the bathtub, and you hoped it had the right temperature, but in the meanwhile, the water pressure on either the cold or the warm had changed, and the water in the bathtub didn't get the temperatures you expected. A 4G network is like these thermostats you have. You turn it on to, say, 39 degrees, and you turn on the water, and actually the thermostat regulate depends on how the water pressure and the colder water is doing, so all the water which comes out of the tap have the right temperature. That's actually how a 4G network is working. It's very intelligent. So that's how the network will be. And when we talk about 5G, we talk about even more intelligent networks, which says, I have different kind of spectrums. In different spectrums, I have different kind of numbers of subscribers that are doing different kind of services, so I actually can ensure that you get what you need in the second you consume it. That's an intelligent network. That's a way to use spectrum in an intelligent way. That is a way to use the infrastructure in an intelligent way. But these rules which we hear about today, it's absurd. It's a little bit like coming to the doctor and say, we give the same medicine to all patients independent of what their disease is. Okay? I think it's important to say, how can we do things right? Let me ask you a question. How many of you have an iPhone? Yeah? A lot of you? Some? Yeah? Had you experienced a full signal on the phone and then you dial the number and then the signal just disappear? Have some of you experienced that? Yeah? Shitty mobile network, isn't it? It's bad. But I tell you one thing, that problem have nothing to do with the network.
that is a mistake or problem with the iPhone. It's losing the signal, and what's happening is when it loses the signal, the phone is rebooting itself, connecting itself to the network, and get the signal once again. I was speaking at a conference. I was in a country where there's a lot of people with an iPhone, and 70% of those who had an iPhone have experienced that during the last 3 months. Okay, so this is related not to the network, but to the phone. 70 to 80% of the bad networks experience you get on your phone is not related to the network, but to the phones you have. So here we have the EU who wants to go in and make regulation of how we control traffic and how we handle the network. Let's look at how the same European Union look at the suggestions that we have to look at the quality of your phones. So 8 regulators, the Danish, the Swedish, the Norwegian, the 3 Baltics, and the Icelandic regulator, they went to the European Union and said, we need to get information on the phone of the quality of the antenna. They actually did a big study by Aalborg University, another department than with Rosalind in, the leading antenna professor, which owns some of the leading patents in the world, and he actually says that the quality of the antenna is really a huge problem. He actually had proved that the worst antenna in any phone on the market right now is the new iPhone 6. So these regulators, the Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, the Finlandic, the 3 Baltic regulators, the Icelandic, went to the European Union and says, let's give consumers some information about the quality of the antenna on their phone. A little bit like with cars. You know, there was a German manufacturer who had a problem with their diesel, you know, how they was doing. EU took that very serious. So these regulators went to the European Union and, Paul, can you tell me what the outcome of that wish was from those 8 regulators? Or could you do it? I can tell you, they turned it down. So now we're talking about, we want to make regulation how we control intelligent network. At the same time, we don't want to give consumers information about the quality of the phones they buy and pay 600, 700, 800 euros for. Sorry, in the European Union, you're not allowed to tell that your car drives a certain number of kilometers on diesel if it don't do that. Okay? You're not allowed to make intelligent networks, but you are allowed to sell crappy phones to the consumers. The Aalto University in Finland did a survey. You have seen the ad measurement, which do measurement of the quality of the mobile network, says this operator has the best network. The Aalto University in Finland have hundreds of thousands of phones around the world who do measurement, crowd-based, of quality of networks. Okay? They say half of the phone cannot even run 10 megabit. Half of the phones. Okay? So if you take a crappy phone and use it on a very intelligent, smart network, then the phone will say this network is not working. But it's actually not the network which is the problem, it's the phone which is the problem. And I can keep on talking about these things, what is important for the consumers. And honestly, none of these people have been able to tell us what specialized service is. We've heard these 3 categories, what should be case by case. The good news here is, during the Mobile World Congress, the EU had a press event where they was talking about the 5G, and Europe wants to be leading on 5Gs. I love this, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, a whole orgy. And I actually said to Mr. Oettinger, I said, Mr. Oettinger, with these net neutrality rules and these way you want to regarding traffic management, when I see how a 5G network will work, where you use different kind of spectrum, can pool it together, you can slice it, and doing all these things, there will be a problem by creating 5G. And if you want Europe to be the leading providers in 5G, this will not be possible. And Mr. Oettinger said, my people have to find a solution on that problem. So basically, the answer to some of the things you've heard today is, if it shows up to be a problem, they have to fix it. Why create a problem and fix it later on if you can avoid the problem? Why not give the consumers information about the phones and the quality of the phones? I can't understand it. Why 8 national regulators from the Nordic region go to the European Union and say, can you do these things for the consumers? And the European Union say, no, we can't. They could agree one power plug should work on all phones and actually not implemented in reality. Look at the iPhone. So, ending up talking about these things, honestly today, where all the evidence? Where the transparency? Why didn't Barrick have any transparency in the process? Why can't we see Barbara von Scheck's PowerPoint presentation from that workshop she held for Barrick? Honestly, we talk about an open and free internet, which is made in a closed environment where there's a lack of evidence and basically very limited transparency. Honestly, it just fills in with what I said. Governments is probably not the best one to ensure that we get a free internet. I'm sorry to say it. And let's go in again. I have some good news for you. Some of the services which actually will be banned according to these rules will actually be in all the networks. Because those who develop the network equipment, they are working on creating the ultimate 5G experience. How to get the best out of spectrum, how to get the best out of infrastructure, how to get the best out of investments. And that equipment will be sold to operators all over the world. But some of the functionalities have to be disabled in Europe because of these net neutrality rules which the BEREC is trying to implement right now. And the worst part is, if you're a small innovative company and you have to be compliant to all these things, we have just heard today with Frode Sørensen saying you have to deploy with the services and then we will have to look at it afterwards. It's a little bit like build a house and afterwards we will try to find out you can get a permission to build a house. Sorry, this is not how you do business. This net neutrality project is a fantastic project. If you're a civil servant, you're a lawyer, or you're a consultant, it's actually creating jobs to these kind of people. It's not giving consumers better products. It's not giving consumers cheaper prices. It's not increasing investments. To be honestly, these rules, if people really understand it, I think they will understand why the British people today said no to the European Union. Thank you.
Well, I guess quite a few people would be happy to intervene or to comment on this last intervention.
Last presentation. Yeah. So, dear friends, I think we have quite an impressive and exhaustive morning. And I still would like to go through a couple of slides which we prepared in a little bit more relaxed form. We did not impose ourselves to start discussing does Europe need regulation or do we need net neutrality discussion. We have taken this like a good policeman as granted. We are now trying to make sure that whatever we do will be based on the agreed guidelines and will be done in the most professional and non-obtrusive way. 80% of our focus is to make sure that our customers would be happy with the services which they are getting today in the next 10 years. Customers are small businesses, end users, citizens, whatever. So I think regulators are here to make sure that these systems go on. When I'm using electrical power and we heard how unregulated energy sector is, I can assure you if the 220 volts in my socket would not be there for half a day, I would have very easy way to convince energy regulator to step in. In this way, we would like to make sure now that when this document is perceived in the positive way, the real users, the customers on the business side and on the private side would really benefit from this regulation. It's not done for the sake for the bureaucrats. It's done for the sake, for the evolution of the users. 36 years ago, from what I understood, 34 years ago, internet has been born and we are now facing some changes. I want to very briefly go with you through some changes. Mobile became as a prevalent solution. bringing many new types of people together to internet, many people which have never seen PC enter the internet via the mobile device. Living room has dramatically changed. From one highly regulated TV channel, everybody was gathered around it. Now we see in the same living room, all the people are doing something, watching different things, enjoying life based on internet protocols. Television has moved from highly regulated, highly prioritized medium, is moving to a common media called internet. Dramatic change, bringing a lot of changes with it. In this living room, most likely right now, father would like to watch sport, but mother decided to watch something else, and the older kid is downloading something, and younger girl would like to make a video conference call with her girlfriend. All these things does not perform very well in big part of fixed network if prioritization of certain services are not available. And it is not going to change in the next few years' time. So we are doing something for the good habits of those different people sharing the same network for different purposes at the same time. And we cannot call all of those services are some sort of next generation internet access services. Schools are not the same. School 100 years ago was a very high quality, the teacher was there, the tablet has unlimited battery life, so we want to make sure when the kids are being trained in the future also their video conferencing facility, when they're on the remote site, it will work 99.9% of time, and not just by chance. So we are looking for a real use cases when the technology will be ready. When we talk about public safety, when those people are moving from high prioritized radio stations to mobile devices, they want to have access to services even in the moment of total disaster. There is a real need for that. Of course, we want to find a balance between efficiency of infrastructure and freedom of access to different services. Of course, this is a big challenge. Takes a lot of deep thinking and a lot of compromises being made. These two words has to come together. In the past 20 years, regulators were one time on one side, second one on the other, and now we are really trying to make a balanced view to make sure that both key concepts are solved at the same time. So why we are talking today a little bit more about video? We are talking about video because video is a dramatic new thing. I just want to skip for 2 slides and I will go back. Miss Mary Meeker, last 2 weeks, she is really the guru of prediction what the internet is, says video has completely changed face. It's moving into real life. So it's not an old-fashioned file transfer anymore, it's not YouTube, it is really going into real time because real-time video really brings events and everything into your doorstep. So then it really becomes an equivalent of television. So the video which we are consuming at the same time over the new media is bringing some new habits. It's not the same like browsing on the web pages. It's something completely different in terms of shape and need of the network to support it. There are, of course, many video types. We started in Slovenia in year 2000 with IPTV multicast. At that time, Slovenia was one of the first countries to deploy Ethernet multicast-based IPTV in the real network, maybe the first. Italians have been doing this on ATM. I know that because I was even personally involved into development of access products which supported multicast. So it took us 18 years to come to the conclusion that multicast is taking too much freedom away from us. Each of us would like to share his own TV watching, would like to personalize. This brings us to IP unicast, which is completely new ballgame, which is taking by storm in last year and last 2 years the bandwidth. And the reason why the peak hour is changing so fast is because of watching television in unicast mode. Otherwise, multicast would easily take it over. Of course, OTT on demand and OTT live streaming, those are two things which are now looking through the eyes of Netflix, and hopefully some European Netflix type of operators would evolve. There is so much European content and we are just waiting for somebody to do it. Otherwise, of course, the regulator will say to Netflix, you are obliged to bring European content to us. And we will see more and more live streaming coming also on the Netflix type of platforms. Live streaming means different quality of service requirement. Otherwise, the user experience for a large majority of users is lousy. My wife would not like to watch television, which is sending data which is not prioritized because my line is a normal DSL connection running at 10 megabit. It doesn't really work very well. And then we move to systems like dedicated video conferencing. Of course, if I can afford 100,000 euro telepresence, I'm happy to pay 100 euro per month for a special service. But if I'm an old lady which would need to have reliable video conferencing call with her doctor, I think this is my basic right, like a water. And to do it anytime, even in the peak traffic hour. And this will bring us, of course, to web and video conferencing and to the new protocol coming in, which I'm sure we'll hear more in the near future, WebRTC. All our browsers are getting in this year the protocol which allows two of us being on the browser to talk to each other, to share videos, to do whatever. So we are now getting all the freedom of usage video even on the peer-to-peer solution. Web browsing using WebRTC is even more demanding for quality of service. And if my child is uploading something on torrent, for sure my quality of experience will be lousy. It's really painful. He doesn't really feel if I have a little bit of prioritization going on, but my quality of experience is dramatically better. So that brings us to a real-life understanding about those legal texts in the guidelines, which more and more I'm reading better and better I can read it, if I want to, of course. So all the numbers which Kate showed us are absolutely true. The things are changing dramatically. Fixed is growing, but within this, it's really internet video which is taking over by everything. 109,000 of internet video comparing to almost nothing of the rest. Busy hour is becoming the focus. Sometimes, in old times when we were doing telephony systems, we were really always talking about busy hour, and we have to guarantee that the network is giving enough capacity to make sure that the 99% of telephone calls is done successfully. So as we discussed in Slovenia, we had a nice history of internet video, of IPTV. We have also fantastic presence. I think we are very proud on the fact that practically all Slovenian telcos are offering triple play services. They are offering also advanced services like catch-up, time shift. For some time already, even on the cable TV, this is available. That's why their peak traffic is growing. I think whatever we have seen from VNI is maybe even more case in Slovenia. That's why we feel that we have a nice case to look at, a real-life situation. Is this something what's going on here in real life, something what absolutely is applicable to the new guidelines, because guidelines are not written for something imaginable. That's why we have looked at this case, and we will keep looking not to stop anything, not to prevent anything, not to do anything, just to say this is a good case from which we can learn, to share with others, and to see how the things are going. We are especially proud on the fact that incumbent has opened the quality of service architecture to other alternative operators. Reasonable work has been done to make sure that the coloring of the traffic is done in the way that different IPTV platforms can coexist on the same network. We are really extremely glad this has been done without regulation, and we will be very happy with the things which will happen without regulation, knowing that regulators should know at least how to look at the case and to say, yes, we are happy on the sake of the customers. It is clear for that purpose, from what we see, that when we are looking to the future of market regulation, a proper unicast prioritization support might be even more critical than multicast. So there is a lot of work for us to be done. Important work is also business side. As we have seen from the numbers, the business segment is a little bit lower than the broadband access, but it's crucial for the development of society. Slovenia is one of the most polycentric countries in Europe. A lot of our small businesses is on the countryside. For us, it's critical to enable development of those people. Clearly, on the infrastructure side, only the common infrastructure is a proper tool to bring high-speed, high-quality connections to those businesses. So we need in these places, we need a high-quality internet access, but we also need whatever at the end will be all sorts of specialized services to make sure that we have a well-balanced infrastructure where the consumer, citizen, and businesses can coexist in the best possible way. So for us, special service is not an enemy. It's fantastic thing. We just want to make sure that if eventually somebody, which we don't really think will happen, luckily, would like to sell specialized services on behalf of reducing the capacity of internet access services, we want to have tool to say, look, you're overspeeding, you have a ticket for that, to be on the safe side. Hopefully, and most likely, this will never happen. We know how important is the last mile, so we want to make sure whatever we do on the access side, on the market regulation, on quality of service, on everything, has to fit together into a common architecture. Those things has to fit together. It doesn't help to provide QoS allowance on net neutrality when the alternative operator would like to get a bit stream from the incumbent. There is no sign of proper services, so we have to make it in a good way. As I mentioned before, WebRTC will revolutionize the way how we communicate to each other. That's why we have to be especially careful that this next generation VoIP, which is not really the walled garden in old-fashioned way, but it's very important for general evolution of services. More or less every service could have WebRTC communication as one of the components. To have better user experience, has to be treated in the network to really work perfectly. A very important thing for majority of consumers. This is not service for 3% or 100 Tesla cars. It is a real service for everybody. And here, of course, we have a challenge of looking at uplink, which is very critical. So, as we said, business traffic crucial. Let's take a look how to find a balance. This is a nice colored picture. I'm not going to go into details. We just want to show you when we were looking at different traffic types. In actual Slovenian case, we want to make sure that in the near future we will know exactly which color is special service, which color is differentiated traffic, for why is one and not the other. There is an interesting case, if you see here below, a small business in the lower right corner is having something like hopefully special service, like 100 megabit good connection to the core, and people are accessing maybe live streaming or WebRTC services using internet access services because it's a general purpose access for everybody. So maybe something like that. I'm not saying this picture is right. I'm just saying on such concrete cases we have to agree how to classify 90% of existing services. And when we make sure that we understand this, it will be dramatically more common interest, common understanding, and less fear and anxiety. And our life will be much easier. So we talked about this. There was so much discussed before. I'm not going to go in detail. Let's try to jump out across this. So we are here confronted with the fact that 10, 20 years ago, we had a high-quality prioritized television and voice networks. Now we are moving forward, either on the top picture with total chaos, but free for all and best efforts. I don't like to be in that ambulance car in such case. Or maybe we do a good light regulation, make sure everything goes smoothly, because when it starts stacking, then it's difficult to do it. We regulators are not the enemy of anybody. We are simply entitled to be policemen. We would like to be a good policeman. In this respect, of course.
But then you have to tell what's legal or what's not legal.
That was not topic of this presentation. This is the last picture. 102 years ago, it was decided in Cleveland, the center of industry in the United States, they will put in place a traffic light, a revolution. Why do they need prioritization of traffic in one or the other way? They could easily survive for another 30 years. If you want to impose fines, you need the tickets, the plates on the car, and even need a driver license. But let's ask ourselves, do we want today the world without traffic lights and driver's licenses and plates? How can we survive the congestion of today's traffic? So I think we are entitled here to do it properly, and I'm sure it will be in the common benefits. Thank you very much.
Well, as somebody who's observing all this conversation, I'll try to maybe look on what you said from a different perspective. For example, it's hard to compare European situation with the US, because we know that the US has a very strong internet industry, internet and content industry. So all this internet neutrality debate, it was present in the US before it came to Europe. And Google's and Facebook's have better lobbies as telecoms in many ways, and Obama was also in favor of the internet business. It was a strategic decision of the US, so you have two strong contestants trying to argue who will be, well, the one on the better side. Then you also mentioned that we want to compare ourselves in some ways to Asian states like Singapore, South Korea, China. We know that those societies have a pretty, well, very different view on how to manage society as Europe does. So you don't have such debates in South Korea. The state simply says, we want to, or it said 20 years ago, just build everything with fiber because it's a state policy, just do it. There was no operator coming to the state and whining, I don't want to invest, it's so expensive. It was just either you do it or you will use your license. It wasn't an option. So it's a different sort of business. So what's the situation in Europe? Because we know that we only have one strong lobby in Europe. It's the telco sector, which influences pretty much.
They're not successful.
Yeah, but
They're not successful.
But that's the question. They're trying to. Well, they're the strongest lobby who, well, want to influence the legislation, and civil society groups and others, and even consumer groups, because we're mentioning consumers. We're mentioning consumers, but most consumer groups are against these new rules. So telecommunications operators are in favor of all this new stuff like specialist services and this. But where does politics stand here? What's the Commission's position on all this? You know, what's your interest? Because there's an impression that telcos are writing legislation for Europe, especially in many nation states. They are the major contributors to legislation. On the other hand, here everybody seems to hate what you do. How come? I'm a bit puzzled.
Let's look at facts. Let's look at facts, okay? GG Connect have made a lot of fantastic reports, which I only can agree with, telling about the lack of investments in infrastructure. So over a 12 years period, the American operators have invested twice as much per capita or per household as the average operator in the average European operators done in the average European countries. European Union keep on talking about we need a more efficient industry so that we can get more investments and consumers can get the good infrastructure. Okay? The reality is investments right now is going down. And the Brexit will even have another negative. If I was sitting on the board of a telecom operator, before EU have pulled their act together, we know where they're moving forward, hold back on investments, okay? So CapEx for 2016 and probably also 27, be hold back, okay? That's one thing. You can't compare Europe with Korea. Korea, people is located basically in 2 cities. They live in rabbit cages, so you put fiber into that one, you get in the whole house. But the other thing, what's interesting is the Korean government have actually made a very interesting report where they're looking at the effect of these things. They call the conclusion of all this fiber to the home in Korea is jobless growth. Okay, have not created growth in economy, have not created new innovative company, new innovation. That's Korean government's own conclusions in their own reports of these things. The European Union have an idea, if we do all these things, the main problem in Europe is digital dyslexia. There came out numbers in Norway that even that I think is like 60-something% of the Norwegians can get 100 megabit. It's like 3 or 4% who buy it or something like that. The numbers came out this morning or yesterday, something like that. In Denmark, 83% of the households have access to 100 megabit. It's less than 10% who buys it, okay? The problem is not supply, it's the demand. Consumers cannot afford or don't want to spend a lot of money. And if we believe that if we just give people access to more broadband, it will create growth in the economy. Listen, Japan have been in for recession for 25 years, okay? They have fiber to the home everywhere. And honestly, I can take tons of examples around Europe. There's tons of case studies. If we increase the speed on internet in developed countries, it won't have the effect which a lot of people believe. It will have it, of course, in Africa and so on, but that's not in Europe. It's about education, it's digital literacy. The Italians, if you go to Italy, which is just around the corner like that, if you go to Italy, you know, the numbers of Italians which never been on the internet, it's unbelievable. Talk to the people in Italy how it is, digital literacy in Italy. I tell you, there's probably more people in the most rural areas of Africa which can read and write than people who can use the internet in Italy in certain areas. So I think it's important to say, we have to look at facts, we have to look at evidence. That's what I keep on coming back to. Okay? We don't have to sit and blame that if we just do these things. The reality is, I talk to investors, I talk to the big investment banks. Listen, Europe, Citibank came out with a report a couple of days ago. It says Europe is the less interesting region in the world to invest in telecommunication. Okay? And they said in the report, they look at why do people invest in telecommunication, and the conclusion is basically don't invest in Europe. Look at the European telecom shares. Listen, honestly, I would say those which are working in DG Competition, DG Connect, they should be forced to put half of their pension funds into telecom shares. Okay? Do you have some of your pension money in telecom shares? You don't. The regulators, they don't do it. Why do these people don't invest their own money in telecom shares? Because telecom shares is a very unattractive paper, okay? You're losing money. TDC was relisted some years ago. It's gone from 50 to 32. Listen, look at all the shares across Europe. Look at Telefonica. Look at Telecom Italia. Or in Brazil just went bankrupt, okay? So I just say, it's just telling about, we have to be realistic. And these micromanagement, when I saw this slide about these services, listen, can you imagine go to the Slovenian regulator and say, can I launch this service? What is the time? What does it take to come with the service to get it approved? Listen, this is like in the old communist days. Sorry to say it in a country like this. Don't go back, move forward. Okay? When the wall went down, there was not the most fantastic telecommunication operators and networks in the old East Europe. Okay? It took years if you could get a phone in East Germany. Okay? We have competitions. We have companies who have invested. You live in a country with 2 million people and 3 mobile networks. 3 operators. It's unbelievable. You should be so happy. And honestly, it's amazing to see this kind of micromanagement. And these people don't know anything about running and building a network operator.
Plus, I think I live in Ljubljana and I have 3 optic fibers at my door, basically. So I already live in South Korea. No, but the question is, and I couldn't help myself noticing here, that,
have a reaction, sorry.
That people missing from this conversation are people from the content industry. Because even telcos would probably agree that the only way for them to generate new source of revenues is data, is actually the need for something, because otherwise you would still be charging for phone calls. Don't you think that is the content industry, which is lacking in Europe, a part of a problem? That all this discussion is pretty much among politicians and telcos, and not the content, who would drive the whole ecosystem into investments.
In Sweden, 27 Swedish media went out and said it was.
Can you just give some, maybe to
I just want to say this fact. 27 Swedish media said there was against zero rating, it was bad for their business and all that. I spoke at the Swedish regulators at an event about these things, and I asked the guy who was from Swedish National TV, where do you have your information from? We would love to do a fact check on the things your opinion, the sources, who have told you these things. And he said to me, we have just Googled it, we found it on the internet. Okay?
Sure.
So 27 Swedish media go out and say, we are against zero rating, and how did they get the information about zero rating was bad? They was Googling it, found on the internet. I said, did you talk to any academics? What is your sources? Tell me about them. Let me tell about who your sources is, who is sponsoring them. If 27 media CEOs, including the Swedish National TV and the Swedish National Radio, all the big Swedish media companies, are not capable to look at these things from an objective perspective and look at facts, but it's just something they Google, and we create policy based on that kind of things, honestly, our society is in the wrong direction. It's going in the wrong direction. It's not the society my kids is going to live in.
Yeah, but that's politics.
Okay, maybe before you come to your question, we are talking a lot about facts here, and I think we should clarify some facts. CapEx in the US. The operators, they included the price of the set-top box, which you need to get your cable TV and to get your internet via cable into the CapEx. This is not done in Europe.
It's done on mobile phones and handsets.
And in the US, the FCC intervenes on that, and this is $30 per month, or 25, whatever, but it's a lot of money, and if you take that out, and if you take other things out, the difference in CapEx is not so large. Telecom shares. If you look at the shares of Deutsche Telekom or Orange, I think they have been climbing by 20 or 30% over the past 2 years. So please have a look at the stock market. The bankruptcy of Oi, it's not a problem of European regulation if a Brazilian operator goes bankrupt, sorry. You said that you need to consult with the regulator before you launch a service. That's not true. The specialized service, you can launch it. You do the same self-assessment as you do in competition law. You have in competition law, you have also rules applicable, and you make your own assessment, and then you take it on your own risk. Finally, there was a statement that we would regulate intelligent networks. That's not true. We have some rules which are applicable to everybody, and not everything which is technically possible is also allowed. If you look at the motorway, which we are seeing here, you have to, your Tesla may run 200, 250 kilometers, but you're not allowed to run 250 kilometers just because it's technically possible. So there are some rules which have to be respected, and we have rules on net neutrality, which is the purpose of which is to ensure freedom of expression, freedom of creation in the content market, and therefore you have to respect these rules. And that brings me to the, let's say, apparent unbalance of the European industry, that there would be a particularly strong telecom lobby. I don't think so. I think telecom lobby is strong in Europe, but there is also European content industry, which is probably less visible than the content industry from Silicon Valley, but still it is present. You have many broadcasters which have been very active in the debate on the net neutrality regulation. You have also startup groups which have been active, and of course you have the end users and the civil society. So I think it's a very balanced approach, and I wouldn't say that the telecom industry is particularly happy with the regulation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Nobody seems to be happy with it.
Oh, thank you. I would like to quote Bill Gates. He said one time that 640 kilobytes should be enough for everybody. So we all know that it's not the case, and dial-up internet is not good enough for everybody. In Slovenia, there are many areas where people don't have broadband, and unfortunately it's probably not going to change for a few years to come. So we are blessed, who are living in Ljubljana and other urban areas, but unfortunately there are a lot of places where people don't have, and we as a government need to think about them as well, and we need to somehow persuade investors to build networks. We had two projects, Gosha 1 and Gosha 2, which finished, and Gosha 3 unfortunately is not here. And I honestly don't know how this will go forward. We do have some strategies to build, but it's the companies who are going to build networks to the final customers, and not anybody else. So it's not happening for the time being, because as we witness, telcos are getting more energy into the arguing why the net neutrality is not good, instead of building the network. That's all there is. Only these two, and to prove my point, I have been involved in the whole telecom single market package. It's a sham, because this package started as, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 paragraphs. And it boiled down to 2. So all these other paragraphs went away, and only 2 were left. Roaming, which is not roaming, and net neutrality, which is not net neutrality. And that's why Slovenia voted against it, if you know. And the reason why is exactly this so-called specialized services. I would like to quote somebody who said that if these special services are so different from the internet, then why are they in the net neutrality in the first place, because there are so many things which are not in this legislation. Why the special services if they are not internet? So one could say that I'm glad you mentioned Kafka. It's not Kafkaesque situation, it's Orwellian situation, because all packets should be treated equally. But unfortunately, some packets are treated more equally than the others. So that's the point. So build networks and let it work itself out. Thank you.
You do.
Maybe
Yeah, it's working. Okay.
Because therefore, I would like to just react to a few of the remarks, and particularly to Mr. Ebel, because this debate, I think we had this already 2.5 years ago about the argument whether the original Commission proposal is already a good safeguard to prevent reclassification of online services as specialized services, and that this substitution provision, it sounds really good, but there is a big problem with that, because it only says that specialized services should not be offered or usable as a substitute for internet access services. And that means being a replacement to the whole internet, but not individual applications. So that would prevent something like Free Basics or Google Free Zone, specialized services that try to really replace the whole internet, but not individual services. This has been made really clear and was a huge point of discussion in the Parliament. So therefore I would like to stress that point so that we don't fall into the same pitfalls as in the early negotiations in the Parliament. On your second point, you also replied to me that encryption is covered in the regulation. That yes, there are good provisions that encryption should not be a reason to deteriorate traffic, but the problem is, although this is in the draft guidelines, you can actually not enforce that, because if you start classifying applications, for example, by quality of service requirements or even by type, and then you have an encrypted connection where you just cannot see what's inside, then you will always misclassify those. And as we've heard, there is a strong trend towards encrypting everything end-to-end in the internet. And all these encrypted traffic will be oblivious for the ISP. So you cannot look inside, you cannot make the right classification. And the stronger we have class-based traffic management, the more this problem with encryption will arise. On that point, there is also, in your framing, it sounded like we are speaking about discriminating against specific applications. So as if only if you slow something down, you have a problem. That's not what's in the regulation. The regulation says in Article 3.3, subparagraph 3, should not discriminate between applications. And that there is a big difference here, because discriminating between traffics also means that... Oh, I said
no discrimination.
Yeah, but the problem is your understanding of reasonable traffic management is in that point then not correct, because even if you just give priority but don't throttle, you're still discriminating between applications.
No, you're differentiating, and that is allowed under reasonable traffic management. So if you have a good reason to differentiate because there is no damage to one thing, and you can give certain requirements to other services without damaging or having an impact on the other, I think that is allowed, and that is the explicit explanation in the recital related to Article 3, paragraph, the second subparagraph on reasonable traffic management.
Yeah, but that's the thing, you cannot give priority to one application without slowing down the others.
But if it does not hurt this slowed down or this slower application, then there's no problem in that scenario.
I would strongly, I don't agree with that argument, because whenever you put someone in the fast lane, there has to be a slow lane.
That's not true. It's not true. It's utterly reasonable. If you're a refrigerated boxcar, this came in the court case in the United States, the judge in the dissent said, if you have a railway and one car needs to be refrigerated because some cargo will perish. It's utterly reasonable to pay extra for that particular car. Some, so you can tell the judge he's an idiot, but that is historical in telecom regulation. Telephone regulation, differentiation, prioritization was utterly accepted. It's part and parcel of telecom regulation. You're in fact going
I'm not arguing
going back
against
that way.
there should be no prioritization at all. I'm just saying we have to apply the criteria of proportionality when we consider traffic management measures. And there, paragraph 63 is not doing that, and therefore we have a problem. That's my basic argument.
Written in the regulation that reasonable traffic management has to be proportionate, non-discriminatory, and so on. So proportionality is in the regulation, and I think it is also in the guidelines. It's mentioned several times, and if it's not in that specific paragraph, it's in the next or in the previous one, I guess.
Okay. This goes maybe too in-depth for the
yeah, maybe you
audience
should
here.
continue
But
privately.
Imagine you get into a startup company who wants to create new, innovative, cool service, and you have to understand these things, okay? Is this something, these kind of rules and how you can interpret it when these two guys can sit and talk the way they do, is that something which is making you things innovative? It's honestly
exactly my
it's
point.
just like
Therefore
going
it
to
should
bed with
be
your wife in the
application
evening,
agnostic and
and
neutral.
then basically she starts to clean her toes. You know, sorry to say it. Honestly, it's so unsexy. It's not driving innovation. It's not driving. It's small companies. I work with a lot of startup companies. If they have to understand these things, they want to solve problems. They want to do cool technology. Okay, that was the idea of Uber.
Can I agree with you on one
Could
point?
you imagine
Can I
that
agree
Uber
with
had
you on one
to
point?
look into taxi regulation?
It's a
from
rare
day number one?
opportunity for you. I'll agree with you on one point. Because I want to pick up, you said before that it is a high burden if you start a service and then the regulator starts acting on it, and only after months or years you know if your investment and your new service is actually legitimate. That's what, yeah, I agree with you on that point, and I would say let's form an alliance for an ex ante approval of specialized services. Let's make the regulators.
Maybe you should. Sorry. Maybe you should continue in private because
I think it's a good idea.
the three speakers are waiting for.
I think that BEREC and the different regulators, they actually have to have a department where you can send in your service and get it approved, the blue stamp before you launch it. That would be fantastic. And every year we need a transparency report. How many applications did they get, and how fast did they handle it? So we can do a benchmark of the 27 regulators. How fast did they approve these things? I think this kind of listen, you have it regarding when you want to build a house. You have to get a building permission. So I think we need the same for telecom service in the future when they have these kind of regulations, which can be compared with the regulation that is related to the fact of building a house, because there's rules regarding the roof, the water, the electricity, and all that. So I think it's a good idea. And it will create jobs among regulators.
Ms. Nyman, you were waiting for. You wanted to say something.
Yes, I think maybe you were actually a little bit before me, so please.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh, thank you. I will not go into your debate, but I would like just to say again about this investment and so on, and which is very illustrative what Mr. Bullet said, and I believe he's a civil servant, and he's actually providing all the fears we have all the time. His quote was, if the operators would use so much money for the networks as for net neutrality lobbying, may I just say from my own experience, I haven't spent 1 cent for the net neutrality lobbying, and I have spent 64 million just for my company for the spectrum, so for the air. I'm spending more than tens of millions per year for the network building, and now I did on the official speed test by the AKOS what we are providing on the shitty antenna on the iPhone 6. We are providing at this point with so many people 110 megabits download, 29 megabits the, upload, and 18 milliseconds of ping. I just want to use this experience, but we are still talking about the Gosha and so on. We haven't got 1 cent from the state, and we have like 97% LTE, 99.6% UMTS, 99.9% GSM. The colleague from the behind is having maybe a 0.5% better or worse depending on the technology, and there is another telecom operator here which is having quite the same. So we are investing enormously, and we are over-regulated. the burdens of us, just on the reports, it's not about just net neutrality, zero ratings and everything. We have a tons of reports to anybody, to a lot of it. We are under attack, under all of them, from the media, from the consumer protection, and we are always replying, and we are always trying to stick with the law. That's why we need the transparent laws, we need the clear laws, but we also need some flexibility. And we do not need the over-regulation. The telco industry, it can be debatable. I checked for the last year, Deutsche Telekom lost maybe 20%. It gained it in 2 years' time. I will show you in the application, which we are freely offering. So there is a lot of truth, but the general idea, because we are not talking on the facts, is that we are investing in net neutrality lobbying instead of investments in our networks. We do investment in our networks. We're even laying people off that we can still invest in our networks. And my final point, if we would be in the Wild West, and if we would be so crooked as the majority of you believes, then we wouldn't be talking about net neutrality, because we wouldn't have the internet at all, because we had so many chances in the past where we could do everything, and we obviously didn't. And now we're talking about some micro things which might be allowed by the telco operators. And we will still invest until the point that our investors, our owners, realize they will soon maybe have more return on investment in a bank than in the business. But that would be my, just over-regulation is here. Leave us some leeway, or at the end point, Google will buy all the pipes and all the air in Slovenia and all of the countries, and then you will not have a discussion with Google. You know why? Because the Google will be omnipresent, and it will come to the Prime Minister, and they will say, look guys, if you want that few thousand of jobs stays in Slovenia, you will give us some leeway to the legislation you're having, which is happening part of the world. So this would be just, please do not go look to the facts, go look to the numbers, what are our investments, what we do for our end users, and just compare what you could access a few years ago in terms of the megabits, download, upload, the pings, and what you can access now. Thank you.
Here or in some white area?
Okay, we have, as I said, at least 2 companies providing 97+% on the 4G, not on the 3G. So, more than 97% of households in Slovenia are having at least 2 competitive 4G LTE networks. Thank you.
I just wanted to come back as well on the back.
Yeah, I think so. Is it red? No. Okay.
I just wanted also to come back on the, why are we even talking about specialized services as part of this regulation? Or services other than internet access services? Because internet access services is one service that you can deliver over an IP-based network. And as we were talking about, with convergence and with IP being the protocol to deliver a very, very wide range of services that aren't just internet access services, there was a feeling, and you know, we think it was legitimate, that you have these safeguards for internet access services. So that's why it's there, because we have IP convergence. Now, again, I think from our point of view, and I think this is also what Peter was trying to clarify, these are safeguards. There might be people who would like specialized services to be regulated in the sense that these are the kind of services that can be delivered as specialized services. But a political decision was taken very clearly in the regulation that there has to be a freedom, because if you don't, if you try to start to define what a specialized service is, you can only define what's on the market today. You can't define what's on the market tomorrow. And if we want a digital single market, and if we want to digitize, if we want Industry 4.0, as I started by saying, we need to have the freedom to innovate. And there shouldn't be a permission to innovate. I have to say, I'm very happy that there wasn't an ex-ante requirement to get an authorization before you launch a new service. We absolutely do not believe in an ex-ante kind of a requirement. We think that's stifling to innovation. If there's an informal dialogue between an operator who is developing, who's thinking about developing a new kind of a service, and want to go and speak informally to the regulator about that, they can do that. I don't think that there's any regulator, of course the regulators in the room can speak for themselves, but I don't think that any of them would say, no, we're not going to talk to you. But I absolutely do not believe that there should be an ex-ante requirement, and there isn't an ex-ante requirement in the regulation. And I have to say, when I hear people say only services which cannot function over the internet, tell me, what is function? What is function? Is it standard definition, if we're talking about video? Is it high definition? Is it 4K? Why can I not choose? Why should I not have the freedom to choose, for instance, as a business, with more and more people working mobilely, why should I not have the option to choose to pay more for a service which is managed so that I have high definition or even 4K definition, better quality video, reliability, and this is really the other thing, it's about reliability. Why should I not be able to have that? Because there are other people for whom this doesn't matter. So why should they then inadvertently be forced to pay more to have a service that they don't necessarily need? And that's why we have the safeguards. We have the safeguards to ensure that internet access services are protected. But I do not see why we want to limit the kind of services that we can develop and innovate in Europe. And I think very clearly that the regulation took a stance on that and said, no, we don't want to limit that because we want a digital single market.
You can have a reply. I can.
You give up? No, don't give up. Start getting funny. Yeah, it actually fits well into something I wanted to reply to Darko when he quoted Bill Gates with the, what was it, 640 kilobits is enough for everybody. And also this notion that we find in the guidelines that exactly what you mentioned, if a service can function over the open internet, that is actually dependent on the quality of the internet that we have in a country right now. And that would lead to situations where in Lithuania, for example, where you have a good fiber network, there are fewer possible specialized services than in an old copper network, for example, Deutsche Telekom in Germany. And so what we basically create here is an incentive for the ISP not to invest in the network, instead double sell the capacity that the user has already bought with services that have an assured quality, a criterion which becomes more and more an incentive for a user to buy once the normal internet access quality deteriorates. And we really have to think if these are the market incentives that we want to create. And there is a long-term perspective that I think we should ask right now, as long as the consultation is still open. Those requirements, in my eyes, cannot be mitigated by any minimum quality of service requirements that the NRA could set. I mean, that's basically always trying to run behind a moving goal and running behind technological innovation, because those minimal quality of service requirements will always be just a baseline and not really what people want. And all this leads to me to the same argument why this quality requirement, this necessity requirement, has to be as strict as possible. And I think the regulation clearly gives us the legislative basis for that. Because when we make mistakes in the necessity requirement, when we allow reclassification of existing online services as specialized services, then we open Pandora's box, and we probably will have a very different internet in 1 decade.
Can I just very quickly come back on that?
Just a
quick engineering point on the speeds. If you had said you could do a thought experiment and say, let's say we turn net neutrality on the OTTs, and say that therefore the only networks we'll ever build will be 644K, what have you. So all the services have to run on that. That would mean there would be a lot of innovation on the server side to crunch down the data so it could operate. What I mean to say, there's nothing that predetermines that speeds have to go up linearly. Every 5 years, through McCann's Law, we keep doubling the throughput on the existing networks. So the real innovation has to be, whatever network you have today, you can be smart about how you use the data to get across. So innovation is not just increasing speed. You can make your service smarter. But the point is they could work together. So this isn't to say, the point is simply, the innovation is about using the assets that you have and having the freedom to do it. You shouldn't have to say, well, only can do this by increasing the speed. Why not? My colleagues who work in our university, they work also in India, they say, well, we're only going to have 1 megabit connectivity, but let's make our video conferencing service. Greenland has had telemedicine since 2008 on less than 1 megabit because they're very smart about how they use the bandwidth. They prioritize it for the social benefit. The operators can manage the traffic in a responsible fashion. And that country has, of the size of that, they all have access to medicine. That is a very socially responsible way to make a decision with prioritization and with very limited bandwidth that we care for. And just the point that if we drop packets, that's okay. Some of us are okay with less than best effort service. If the signal from my fridge doesn't get to the thermostat or whatever and they lose that packet, that's okay with me. That's not the end of the world. But my heart patient signal, I'm willing to pay more because I care about that. So not all of the data is equal in that respect, and I shouldn't have to pay the same for it.
Ms. Nyman?
Yeah, I think, we're precisely not talking about reclassifying. I mean, that's what the safeguard is there for. That's why it says that it has to be necessary to enable a corresponding higher quality of service. If there isn't, then of course that's a circumvention, and that's what the safeguard is there to ensure it doesn't happen. And if it does happen, the NRAs have the tools and the powers to step in. But what I do not understand, what I certainly do not agree with, and what I absolutely very clearly do not believe that the regulation is doing, is saying we can only have one level of quality. One service should be the same level of quality for everyone. No, I'm sorry. If someone is willing to pay a higher price to receive, so VoIP. There are a variety of VoIP services out there that you can access best effort through your internet access service. If a telco, either its own service or in a partnership with a third party, wishes to deliver a managed VoIP service that may, for instance, also be interconnected with the PSTN, that then actually also ensures reliability of always going through and not ever dropping the calls, why should they not be allowed to deliver that? Because, and this is why I have the problem with saying that cannot function, because most of the time, Skype does function. But if it's because I want to use a VoIP service that I know always functions, I can always get through, then a managed VoIP service that's also interconnected to the PSTN, that's something that gives me an enhanced level of quality. And there'll be a contract that specifies these are the QoS parameters, this is the reliability that's going to be attached to the service. In a business scenario, it'll be an SLA, a service level agreement. Again, if you can then ex post show that actually this is all, pardon my French, BS, and you haven't delivered this, fair enough. Then it's just a reclassification. You just take an internet access service and relabel it. Of course, absolutely, that should be sanctioned. That's not allowed. I think that's very clear. But the guidelines, and this is why we have problems with a couple of the paragraphs, seems to be saying something along the lines of what you're saying, is that only for services which cannot function. And I'm sorry, but you can receive various services at different levels, and I do not see why all end users should be put into one box. This is not a one-size-fits-all. And then my very final point, let's also remember this is not just about consumer services. Again, let's remember these are converged networks that are going to be used to deliver an incredibly wide range of services and applications that we just, it's also abstract. And maybe it's difficult to understand today the level of digitization, the level of connectivity, but really it's not just about consumers, it's not just about Netflix, it's not just about video. And a lot of these services, actually, you can optimize them and you can prioritize them without there being any negative impact, because it's not always about bandwidth. A lot of the time, it's about latency and it's about reliability. And that doesn't really have anything to do with the bandwidth.
Okay, last intervention, because we're probably all need a break.
So really, I'm really sorry, but I have to go now. But just to respond really quickly, so I think that's the distinction and the two readings that we can have. So would it be possible for Skype to just repackage their services, Skype crystal clear, give it SLA to their users, say, we now assure you that you basically get what you got before, but now we made a little bit more sure that you actually get it, and then we can reclassify? Netflix would like to do the same, and many other applications. So that's the problem here. So it becomes a marketing trick. It becomes something that you just promise to your user. That's interconnection and CDNs.
No, this is not interconnection, this is IPTV. And I'm sorry, you do get enhanced capabilities and functionality and quality if you get it for IPTV. And I'm sorry, if a user, like, okay, me, I don't have, in Belgium, I can get Netflix through Belcom's IPTV service. I don't because I'm like, I don't really personally care, but if others care, why shouldn't they be able to buy that?
Yeah, you're trying now to extend the argument, although you know I have to go. But the problem is that we lack the safeguards to allow such things. There is neither requirement to offer specialized services indiscriminately, nor are there any other safeguards that would mitigate the problems of such a reclassification. And that's the problem. That's also why I tried to explain in my slides that it is not the quality assurance given to the end user is corresponding and connected with a logical end to the objective requirements that the NRA has to evaluate. And therefore, those have to be objective and have to be based on the functionality offered. But let's continue this discussion at a later time. And hopefully, Cisco will submit something to the BEREC consultation in a non-confidential mode, I hope.
After
we
this,
will be responding, not just as Cisco, but as the vendors. There'll be a joint vendor response. Because frankly, this is a point where this isn't just about Cisco, but the vendors were very aligned on this. So.
But Thomas will provide us 34,000 or 100,000 responses. So there's no doubt about who wins. Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, Cisco on the one side with one response, and then 10,000 or hundreds of thousands of internet activists, which makes computer-generated complaints. Welcome to the democracy. And
Well,
what was it they said when they presented it? It was those which have the best arguments, not facts.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to, we both know that you need, if you want to actually be the one who, to order such an analysis or something, you need quite a lot of money. And civil society, usually the only weapon it has is something like that to use for campaigning. So
those
it's not a fair comparison.
Sorry, Ford Foundation have spent $50 million supporting the $100 million on supporting internet activist net neutrality campaigns, okay?
Sure.
Ford Foundation, $100 million. Sorry, the internet activists have bigger budgets fighting for net neutrality than the operators. And I would like to prove that.
Yes, do it. Yeah.
I will do it. You get the numbers.
How much are you paid for doing this?
I would like to answer the question. I would like to answer the question what I'm living off. You can go to my website, strandreports.com. All the information, everything we're selling on that website, we sell reports to other people. You can go to the website.
Can I stop commercial activities like a regulator? If you allow me, since I'm going to use the regulatory role to say the timekeeping role is bringing us to a point where outside is something nice, refreshments for everybody. I would just like to ask you, we will publish this video. We would be more than happy if the communication and commenting and social media around this video and our event would continue, would be fantastic. Would be really in line with our role in the future communication world. So we are, in this respect, very happy, and I just would like to propose to the moderator to invite everybody to the refreshments.
So the regulator has spoken. That's probably one of the few things we could agree today. That's legal and it's free, and you're not infringing anything.